Guess who's back? Back again. Fanny's back. Tell a friend. It's time for our first legit episode of Funny Pages. Let's get started. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Hello, homies. Welcome to Thumb Together. My name is Andrew Fantasia, and today we're going to be talking about the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy together. This is the first true episode of Funny Pages. We're going to see how this show goes. We're going to talk about books, science fiction, fantasy, all that really, really fun stuff. And we're going to dive into it and sort of explore maybe things that just make literature, in particular these kinds of genres of literature, so gosh darned fun. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. So on today's episode, I want to talk about the Darker Shades of Magic trilogy. Now, when you hear the word shades and the words book trilogy together in one sentence, your mind turns to some pretty shit-covered places. I promise you, this is not one of those places, okay? This is something actually enjoyable. Sorry, 50 Shades fans, you're reading smut. Anyway, before I alienate anyone else, let's just cut right to the chase and talk about the Darker Shades trilogy. The Darker Shades trilogy was written by V.E. Schwab, which is a very fun name to say. And it's comprised of these three books here. You have A Darker Shade of Magic, A Gathering of Shadows, and A Conjuring of Light. As you can see, these are some pretty hefty, chunky books. So what's it all about? This story takes place in the early 1800s, I believe. I'm not 100% clear on the date, but I believe it's the early 1800s. In London. Victorian-ish London setting. Very cool. You gotta love some Victorian London. And it follows this gentleman right here, whose name is Kell. And Kell is something called an Antari. And Antari are magical people who have the ability to not only wield magic, but they have the ability to hop between parallel universes. That's right, there are 4 universes in the Darker Shades of Magic trilogy. And in particular, they are always set in London, except for a few scenes in the third and final book. But for the most part, it's always London, just parallel versions of London. So as you can see here on the cover, Kell is hopping from one London to the next. And there are 4 Londons throughout the series. There is Grey London, Red London, White London, and Black London. Grey London is our world, okay? That's where, Industrial Revolution happens. Cabbage is a thing in Grey London. It's our world. It's the world we live in, baby. Then there's Red London. Red London is sort of a beautiful, brilliant utopia. Picture the Emerald City in Wizard of Oz, but instead of emerald, it's red. This is a world where magic is abundant and it's everywhere, and many, many, many people can use it. And the royal family is a beloved royal family, and they rule London, but they're actually ruling London. It's not just sort of like for show, like in Grey London. Sorry, royals. Red London is essentially what we wish our world would be like. Then you got White London. White London ain't pretty, folks. This is a world where magic has kind of taken its toll on the people and sort of sapped the energy from everything. So White London is very colorless. White, there's always like white ash falling from the sky, and it's not a good place to live. People who live there are starved because the magic is being seeped out of their bodies. So it's kind of like the whole world of White London is in a perpetual state of drug withdrawal. It's like they were once like Red London, once upon a time, and all of a sudden the magic was slowly sucked away from them. So they are ravenous. They see a person with magic and they basically want to devour that person, zombie-like, so that they can take the magic from them. So White London is a very dangerous place. It's ruled by some very sadistic mofos. You do not want to go to White London. Then there's Black London. Black London is essentially what White London is going to become sooner or later. It's literally just a black void of ruin. Nobody lives there. Everybody's dead. It's just a ruined city, rubble, the walls of buildings long crumbled. The magic has been seeped away. Nothing lives there but shadow and death, I guess. Not even death, because there's no life left to be dead. It's just a husk of a world. So Kel, your main man, your homie, he hops between worlds. He works for the King and Queen of Red London. He was actually adopted by them. And he just runs around, trying to keep the peace between red, white, and gray Londons. But he also trades in little, antiquities that he likes to sell every now and then, because it's a hobby of his, even though it's kind of illegal because you're not allowed to sell things from one universe to another. It's bad for space-time continuum or something. It's some kind of Doc Brown explanation for that, okay? And he accidentally picks up something from Black London, and you don't want to pick up anything from Black London. And when he brings that to Grey London, trouble ensues. And that's where he meets the other protagonist of the series, this girl right here, Lila Bard. And Lila is a thief. She's basically like an Oliver Twist kind of hero. She's just an orphaned thief who lives on the streets. She's got a glass eye because she's badass. She's got a lot of knives. And she cuts people and steals things. And she's just basically a ne'er-do-well. And she meets up with Kel. And the two of them get caught up, whisked up in this crazy adventure. And Lila discovers that, she's pretty decent with magic too. She just didn't know it because she lived in our gray, boring London where magic ain't a thing. Instead, we have taxes and cabbage. The whole trilogy actually follows a very standard movie trilogy format, like the Star Wars trilogy or Back to the Future or The Matrix, wherein you have the first book/film, which really introduces the worlds and all the concepts and characters and tells its own complete story and finishes, and that's it. And, it really could just be a one-and-done kind of deal. But then the sequel comes out, addresses some more of the loose ends that might not have been really important, but were sort of brought up in the first one, ups the stakes, creates all kinds of new characters and settings and tensions and whatnot, and ends on a very, very big cliffhanger. And then the third book is all about resolving that cliffhanger. So why would I recommend the Darker Shades of Magic trilogy? I think that they are a good gateway drug for people who haven't gotten into fantasy yet. And here's what I mean by that. Like I said earlier, these are big, thick, hefty books. This last one is a brick. Okay, you can, buy a few of these, you can build yourself a house, Minecraft style. However, they're fairly quick to breeze through. The chapters are very short, so ba-boom, ba-boom. Some chapters are like 2 pages long. You'll get through them in a breeze. So it's great for people who don't really pick up books all that often. They get intimidated by big, chunky works of fiction like this. They're going to be impressed with how quickly they're getting through this thing. They're going to be like, oh my god, I'm halfway through already. How did that happen? Also, for first-time fantasy people, which I'm hoping some of you are watching right now, this is also a great gateway drug for you. Here's the thing. The Darker Shades trilogy is fantasy. Yes, absolutely. There is magic, and there are kings and swords and evil, shadow beings and things like that. I would actually liken the magic system to something similar to Avatar: The Last Airbender. A lot of element wielding and such, but with a bit of a different sort of slide to it. So all the ingredients of a great fantasy are in there. However, it starts off rooted in the real world, so it transitions you into the fantasy through the eyes of Lila, as opposed to just dropping you into the middle of a thing like, oh my god, so this is Teleranla, the sword of Kazutha, and he's going to take it to the mountain of Karak to fight the dragon Shishmibop. You'd be like, what is happening? A lot of fantasies do that. This, you're not going to get that. You're going to slide smoothly into the fantasy thing. It's lubricated for your pleasure. It's also very light on world building, which is kind of amazing when you think about fantasy in general. A lot of fantasy authors, myself included, we get carried away with world building. We're just like, I'm going to make this and that and that, and we have a stockpile of things, of toys, and we're not even really sure what to do with them yet. We just have a toy box full of toys, and we're like, look at all these toys we made. And readers are like, yeah, but, what do the toys do? Do they have, like, karate chop action? Do they shoot lasers? And we're like, I don't know. I have toys. Buy my book. A lot of fantasy authors are very, very guilty of this. I'm looking in your direction, Tolkien. V.E. Schwab sets up a fantasy world, sets up the rules very clearly, guides you through it easily, but this world is not gargantuan. Like I said before, aside from a few choice scenes in book 3, which are on like a pirate ship sailing around, you are always in London. You're just in a different version of London. and they are just hanging around London, around like Buckingham Palace, or Red London's equivalent of Buckingham Palace, or White London's equivalent of Buckingham Palace. That's literally it. There's like 3 locations in this whole trilogy. That's pretty much the gist of it. So you are not going to be overwhelmed by exposition, overwhelmed by world building, overwhelmed by cultures and creatures and things that don't exist in the real world that you have to suddenly put a face to in your brain. It is 100% beyond the shadow of a doubt accessible to everyone. Now, why wouldn't I recommend the Darker Shades of Magic trilogy? To be honest, for almost the same reason that I would recommend it. If you're a more seasoned fantasy and sci-fi reader, if you're somebody like me who kind of devours these things on a weekly basis, and you're looking for big, giant, Star Wars and Harry Potter levels of world building, you're not going to find it in the Darker Shades. This is simple, simple, simple. This is bare bones, 3 palaces. You're never going to stray far from that. The same cast of characters, with a few tiny new additions that, you will not be overwhelmed with information. And to a lot of readers, that's not a good thing. A lot of readers want more. Design this entire world from scratch and parcel it out to me. And I want to know every language, and I want to know every world and continent and stuff. That's not in here. This is just some basic stuff happening in 3 different Londons, occasionally a 4th London that I think maybe see once, if that. If not, it's just like described. So this is a smaller scale. This is like if something like The Wheel of Time or Lord of the Rings is a massive blockbuster Hollywood movie, this is like a Netflix miniseries. It's smaller scale, smaller budget. I'm talking from if it was adapted to screen standpoint, it would be a smaller budget. Less characters, less worlds, less things to remember. And a lot of people don't like that. I understand. Personally, for me, I prefer something a little meatier. But I welcome and I embrace great stories that are still, simple and easy to digest, as long as they are still great stories. And I think that the Darker Shades trilogy at the end is a great story. But if you're one of those people who really, really needs a lot of food on your plate, you might not walk away from this with a full belly. Also, if you're like me, you love interesting villains. And unfortunately, I'm not a fan of the villain of this trilogy. Without spoiling too many things about him, his name is Oseron, and he doesn't really have much of a presence until the 3rd book. He's in the 2nd one a little bit, and that's fine. He doesn't have to be in all of them all the time, but he's just kind of like this whiny, sort of avaricious kind of character where he just is like, mine, mine, mine. You will bow to me. If not, mine. Like he's just sort of very simplistic and greedy, and he just devours things. Like there's really not much to him. I wasn't interested when he showed up. The good villains are, I'm always like, please let the villain be on the next page. Like I need to learn more about the villains. And with Oseron, I was like, every time Oseron showed up, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. We got to hear about how much he wants everything again. The heroes were much more interesting characters, and I think V.E. Schwab knew that, because Oseron is really not present for very much. He's almost animal-like in the way he thinks. He just sort of thinks very instinctively, like survive, fight, kill, mine, mine. That would get tiring if he was a more upfront, up-close kind of character. So thankfully they focus on the good guys, and they just kind of leave Oseron to do his evil thing on the sidelines. But the evil thing he does is pretty effing scary, and it makes the stakes high, so full points there. So yes, the Darker Shades trilogy is not the most in-depth, epic, gargantuan thing you will ever read, but it is really well written. It is a damn fun trilogy of books. There's a lot to unpack there, and a lot of just juicy goodness. Even though the plate is not full, the food is juicy and full of goodness, and that to me is the hallmark of a great writer. I haven't read any of V.E. Schwab's other work. She's got, I heard this other series that I think focuses on superheroes, so it's more of a sci-fi, and I'm very interested to dive into that now, because Darker Shades impressed me. V.E. Schwab impressed me with just the way her prose flows so smoothly and quickly. I got through a book this big in a little under 2 weeks. So that's a sign of a writer who knows her pacing well. If you've read the Darker Shades trilogy, chime in the comments. Let me know what you thought of it. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why would you recommend it? Why wouldn't you recommend it? And if you haven't read it, hopefully this video makes you think maybe you should dive in and take a peek for yourself. But that has been the first episode of Thumb Together Funny Pages. Let me know what you think of the show, too. If you have any ideas for books you want me to talk about, let me know in the comments. I have already taken one suggestion to heart. My friend, Mr. Ryan Felice, Ender's Game is next, I promise. So that has been Funny Pages. I'm Andrew Fantasia. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you here next time, and until then, adios.